ahead.
Good evening and welcome to our program. This is the Lake Oscawana Management Advisory Committee in cooperation with the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Putnam County. We're delighted to once again work with them to present important information to our residents on how we can protect our lakes. We are lucky to have with us this evening Lynn Bernstein, who is a master gardener and very knowledgeable in rain gardens and rain barrels and protecting our water bodies. I think you'll find it very useful and interesting information. So please listen carefully. Lynn, it is your show. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alan, and thank you, Lomac and the town of Putnam Valley for hosting this presentation on a topic that I think is extremely important and getting even more important every day, and that is managing residential stormwater. I think we all understand that wherever you live on the water, and what we do on land makes a big difference on what happens in our lakes. We all know about the hazard that aging septic systems pose to water quality in our lakes, but according to the EPA, polluted stormwater runoff is an even greater threat to clean water. So it's really important that we pay some attention to this. In addition to being a master gardener, I just want to mention I'm also a master naturalist, a master forest owner, and most recently I received certification as a master rain gardener from Clemson University, the land-grant college in South Carolina. And I'm very happy to be able to share my knowledge with you about rain gardens and residential stormwater management. Now, before I get started, I'd like to share a little bit of information with you about the Cornell Cooperative Extension. It's a very useful resource that I hope you'll take advantage of. We're dedicated to providing research-based information to the residents of Putnam County on topics such as gardening, nutrition, youth development, and conservation, among other things. And I encourage you to visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our mailing list for newsletters and event announcements, and also educational content. We also have a dedicated email address for garden-related questions, and a lab where you can have your soil tested and bring samples of insects and diseased plants for identification. Okay, so on to rain gardens and rain barrels for residential stormwater management. Protecting our lakes one garden at a time, because wherever you live on the water, and every little bit that we do on land can make a big difference in the lake. And I want to emphasize that stormwater management is not just a concern for lakefront homeowners. We all drain into something in the watershed, whether it's a stream, a wetland, or the lake. All our runoff eventually ends up in the lake. So managing it is important wherever you live. In the next hour or so, I'll be talking about controlling stormwater runoff, that is the water that runs off our roofs, driveways, sidewalks, roads, and other impervious surfaces. I'll talk briefly about the way we've traditionally managed stormwater and why this approach is not optimal for our lakes. And then I'll introduce rain gardens as a viable alternative to existing stormwater infrastructure that is effective, economical, and beautiful. And finally, I'll talk about how rain barrels can be used in addition to rain gardens, or instead of one if a rain garden is not an option on your site. I'll also throw in a few other ideas for reducing stormwater runoff on our properties. So what exactly is a rain garden? Well, it's a sunken garden bed, a landscape depression that's designed to capture surface runoff before it reaches a storm drain or water body. It's planted with native plants that filter and cleanse the water and allow it to infiltrate into the ground and into our aquifers, where it's accessible for drinking and other domestic uses. On this planet that is about 70% covered in water, only 3% of the water is fresh water, and of that, nearly 70% is inaccessible to us, locked up in glaciers and ice caps. Our fresh water is continually moving through the water cycle. You may remember the water cycle from elementary school or middle school science. So our water is continually moving through the water cycle from the earth to the atmosphere, and how we manage it when it's with us on earth is critical to the quality and quantity of our fresh water supply. You probably remember something about the water cycle from school. The rain falls and it's either taken up by trees and other plants that transpire it back into the atmosphere, or it infiltrates into the ground where it fills our wells and also maintains our lakes through groundwater flow. I want to point out this arrow groundwater flow here. This is the rainwater that has percolated into the ground and is building up in the water table and basically supporting the lake by providing fresh water when the lake level is low, and it's there to sustain the lakes in times of drought. This next drawing shows a little bit more clearly the relationship between groundwater and lake water and how they are continually interacting with each other. So you can see if the lake is lower, the whole water table is lowered and groundwater drains into the lake. And some of you may be aware of the fact that sometimes when a lake is lowered artificially, as my lake of Roaring Brook Lake is lowered for seasonal drawdown, occasionally a private well goes dry temporarily because the groundwater seeps into the lake basin, and because there is this constant connection between groundwater and the surface water that's in the lake. We want our lakes to be filled with groundwater, not with runoff. Groundwater is filtered and clean, and that's what we want to see getting into our lakes. So this is what happens if things are working as they should. But if not, precious rainwater runs off the surface of the ground directly into the lake or into a storm drain that empties into the lake. And that runoff carries with it all sorts of pollutants. So clearly, what we do on land has a big impact on what ends up in the lake. Now let's look at how rainwater used to flow before the development of houses, roads, and other impervious surfaces. So if you look at the diagram on the left, it shows this water cycle that I just showed you before development. This is the way it used to work, and the way it might have been in Putnam County several hundred years ago. 50% of the rainwater fell on the landscape, natural landscape, and infiltrated into the ground. 40% either evaporated or transpirated into the atmosphere, and only 10% became runoff straight down the surface of the ground into the lakes. The diagram on the right shows how this scenario has changed now that we've built up our towns and villages and cities. What happens now is only 15% of the rainwater infiltrates because it cannot get through this paved surfaces and hardscaping and roofs. And so 55% is running off straight down the surface into our lakes. And only 30% actually gets taken up because there are fewer plants, fewer trees to absorb the water and transpire it. Despite all the rainfall that we have, and we have an annual average of about 50 inches of rain, only 15% of it infiltrates into the ground and 55% runs off into the water bodies, taking with it soil particles, nutrients that cause the overgrowth of algae, bacteria from pet waste and septic systems, heavy metals and oil and grease from the roads, sediment that clouds the water and destroys habitat, pesticides and herbicides that interfere with the lake's normal ecosystem functions, and other pollutants we don't want in our lakes. And this runoff is referred to as non-point source pollution. And our activities on land are the cause of it. But it's not a hopeless situation. Since we cause it, we can also manage it. And we are now living with the impact of having 35% of our precipitation going to surface runoff instead of infiltrating into the ground. And this is important because the vast majority of Putnam County is served by private wells and relies on good quality groundwater. So caring for our lakes and caring for our fresh water supply go hand in hand. So how do we currently manage stormwater? Well, this picture on the left is it just shows you how we do it. We do it by capturing all our runoff and sending it into a drain, into a pipe, out of sight, out of mind. But where does it go? Well, I think now we know where it goes. Look at all that crud that we are basically washing straight into our lakes. And traditional stormwater management practices have become inadequate for the increasingly severe rain events that we've been having. And so we find we're flooding because we just can't absorb as much rain as we have. Our drainage systems are not working properly. They weren't designed for these kinds of storm events and this much development. All those impervious surfaces, the roofs, driveways, patios, and even lawns that are actually considered impervious surfaces are causing the runoff that increases the flooding and erosion, introduces pollution and silting into the lake, and carries bacteria that cause beaches to be closed, reduces infiltration, groundwater flow, and aquifer recharge. Obviously, we can't go backwards. We can't eliminate impervious surfaces, but we can get our developed areas to function more like natural areas that they used to be. And green infrastructure is the answer. Specifically, green infrastructure that's distributed throughout the watershed so that each property manages its own runoff without sending it downstream. Whoops. By using the landscape to mitigate stormwater, we can change the situation one garden at a time. Because most property is privately owned, it falls to us as individuals to address our own runoff as close to the source as possible, as close to the impervious surface, as close to the house, the driveway, whatever is causing the runoff, so that we catch it before it becomes runoff. Because as soon as it starts to flow, it starts to pick up pollutants, and we want to prevent that. And that is what rain gardens are all about. Each property catches and filters and infiltrates its own runoff, preventing pollution-laden stormwater from entering the storm drains and the lake. And as an added bonus, by diverting stormwater to rain gardens rather than sending it to the highway drains, we are also lessening the load on the municipal stormwater infrastructure, making it more effective and easier to maintain. So a properly designed rain garden planted with native plants creates a permeable surface that disconnects the source of the runoff from the storm drain system and prevents runoff from reaching the lake, allowing it to infiltrate and filter through the groundwater and recharge our aquifers. It is possible to mitigate most, if not all, of the runoff on a property with a well-designed rain garden. You can see here in this picture how the rain garden stops the runoff in its tracks before it reaches either a drain system or a lake. And rain gardens are not only, whoops, sorry, I think I went too far there. Rain gardens are not only functional, but also beautiful landscape features. They can be designed in nearly any style and have the added bonus of reducing lawn area and the associated mowing. So it's kind of a win-win here. So where should you put a rain garden? How do you decide where to put it? Well, the first thing you want to do is identify the source of the runoff you want to mitigate. Is it coming from a roof, a driveway, a patio, maybe even the road? And you want to find a flat or a very gently sloped area that is close to the source where there's room for possible overflow. And it's important that the area drain well. The rain garden should not hold water for more than 24 hours. And you can test the percolation of the area by digging a hole about 12 inches deep and filling it with water, and watch the water level to see how fast it drains. Ideally, you want it to drain completely within 24 hours at a rate of 1 to 1.5 inches per appropriate plants. So you definitely don't want to put it in a wet, boggy area. There, you can certainly create a bog garden. They're lovely features, but that's not a rain garden. A couple of other things to consider for when choosing a site are that it be at least 10 feet from the foundation. You don't want to be sending all this water towards your house. You want it 25 feet from a septic field, so you avoid saturating the field. 10 feet from a well, 10 feet from a property line, and not on top of utilities. If you have public utilities with underground lines, you want to call 811 to have somebody come and mark off where those lines are. If you have private, like private gas line or private water line, you'll need to call a private vendor of service to come and show you where those lines are. So another factor to consider in siting your rain garden is what kind of soil do you have, because it impacts the percolation rate. So basically the three kinds of soil are sandy, silt, and clay. And you can do a quick and dirty test to see the percentages of sand, silt, and clay by take a 1 quart jar and you fill it with about 2 cups of soil, and then fill it the rest of the way with water, shake it up, and let it sit for a while. And the first thing that will happen is the sand will all settle to the bottom. You can see in the picture here, this is the sand layer, and then the silt will settle. That might take a couple of days to actually happen, and finally the clay. And you want to let it sit until you have 3 levels, 3 layers showing, and then you can kind of eyeball what percentage of sand, what percentage of silt, and what percentage of clay you have. You can also take your soil to the cooperative extension where they will perform the test for you and give you the results, so you'll know whether you have an appropriate site. The sandier the soil, the quicker it will infiltrate, and the smaller the rain garden can be. With a lot of clay, the soil won't infiltrate quickly. You'll be holding more water, so you'll need to make a larger rain garden so that it has room to contain all of the rain from that particular rain event. And I must say, I always thought, oh, I have a lot of clay soil, because I don't know, I just assumed I had clay soil until I did this test. I was surprised at how sandy my soil really is. So I would encourage you just for fun to do this jar test and get an idea of what kind of soil you actually have. Then again, before siting your rain garden, go out into your property during a rainstorm and maybe take a copy of your survey or draw a sketch of your property indicating the boundaries and buildings and other impervious surfaces, and kind of map how the stormwater flows, indicate the downspouts, where the water's coming from, where it's puddling, and anything that you notice happening during a rainstorm, because those are the things you want to be able to mitigate with your rain garden. And by putting the rain garden in the middle, in between where the water's coming from and where it might naturally want to go, which would be the lake or the drain, by putting the rain garden in the middle, you're intercepting it and breaking the connection and cutting off the runoff. And that is exactly what we want to do. The next question is, how are you going to get the water to the rain garden? So most commonly, it's coming from a downspout on your house. And you can do that very easily by attaching a pipe to the bottom of the downspout and running it into the rain garden. And it could be as simple as just one of these corrugated drain pipes that runs on the surface of the ground, although that could be a trip hazard and might be kind of unsightly. You might want to put it underground. You could make a little swale that could be grassy or gravel from the downspout into the rain garden. Or you could do something as attractive as this little sort of dry stream bed that directs the water from the downspout into the rain garden. And this is a landscape feature unto itself, which is nice whether it's raining or not. So next, you ask, how large should a rain garden be? Well, the average residential rain garden is between 100 and 300 square feet. Anything much larger than 300 square feet is really too big for the average homeowner to do, and you would need heavy equipment for that. But what you need to consider is how large is the drainage area that you're mitigating. If it's a roof or a patio, whatever it is, you want to know what the square footage of that impervious surface and count on about 30% of that drainage area to be the size of your rain garden. But also soil type and the depth of the rain garden play a role here. So sometimes it takes a little bit of adjusting, maybe making it deeper, maybe putting in more permeable soil if things aren't working quite the way you want. And to calculate the size of the impervious surface is simple. Length times width gives you the square footage. Here you can measure the roof. You don't have to go on the roof. You can just measure at the foundation or where the walls meet the ground. You just measure the length, and then you can determine the area. And a 1,000 square foot roof. A 1,000 square foot roof area can generate 600 gallons of water during a 1-inch rain event. So that's something to keep in mind, that you might need to contain 600 gallons of water during our average rain events, although we are having larger storms these days, but that's sort of the rule of thumb. And the next decision is, how deep should a rain garden be? Generally, 8 to 12 inches is adequate. Again, otherwise it's difficult for a homeowner to dig without heavy equipment. You know, you'd need to bring in a backhoe or something like that for digging. But the depth, again, is determined by the soil type and the percolation rate and the slope of the ground that the rain garden is going into. So the steeper the slope, the deeper it must be to hold the water. As you can see here, what you do when you dig out your rain garden, the basin of the rain garden, and you're creating a level bottom to the ponding area, the soil that comes out, that you dig out, gets deposited at the bottom on all the way around the rain garden. Or in this one, they've actually put stone around there as well to contain the water. Now, ideally, you don't want to put a rain garden on a steep slope, because the water won't stay in the rain garden unless you are building a really high berm around the bottom. So what you can do to determine your slope is, it's not too difficult. You put a stake in the ground at the top of the slope, assuming it's a gentle slope. If it's a totally flat area, then you don't really need to do this. You just need to dig it out about 8 inches. But if you're on a little bit of a slope, which most of us are in this area, you put a stake at the top and a stake at the bottom, and you connect the two with a string. That's at the top at the ground and across to the downhill stake. And you measure the distance, the height of the string, assuming you have to make the string level. You measure that height, and you measure the distance, and then you divide the height of this point here, the height of the string to the stake. You divide it by the distance, by the length, and you multiply by 100, and that is your percentage of slope. And you want to try to keep it less than 8%. Now, if you just can't get to less than 8%, then one thing you can do is create more than one smaller rain garden that will overflow into another rain garden. You can cascade them instead of having one large rain garden, several smaller ones. As long as your pond, your basin, the bottom of your ponding area is kept level, it will overflow down into the next rain garden. And this can actually be a very appealing landscape feature as well. Now, if all this sounds a little complicated, the University of Connecticut has come to our rescue with a rain garden app, which is online at rgapp.nemo.uconn.edu. and it will help you calculate the rain garden size and depth. It has a lot of nice articles and instructional videos about how to build a rain garden, and you can install it on Android or iPhone as well as on a browser. And here, in this screen, you see it helps you measure your impervious surface using an overhead view from Google Maps. You just input the points of your impervious surface, your roof, your patio, your driveway, and it'll tell you how big your surface area is and calculate how big the rain garden should be. Oops. And now the fun part is choosing what to plant. We use native plants in a rain garden because they are especially suited to rain gardens, because they have the deep roots, much deeper than non-native plants. And those roots go down into the soil, they increase soil permeability, and they guide the water into the ground where we want it. And they're adapted to our climate. They can deal with both flooding and drought conditions that we experience. And they support the soil microbes that are doing the important work of filtration, of taking in the pollutants and breaking them down and holding them so that it doesn't go down into our water supply. When you're selecting plants, you need to be careful to consider where in the rain garden you're planting. So there are 3 planting zones in a rain garden. Basically, the bottom, the middle, the sides, and then the upper edges. It's essentially dry, moist, and wet. Very similar to what you would plant in a shoreline buffer planting. As you're getting closer and closer into the water, you have the same situation. You want to aim for a variety of plants, different sizes, different shapes, different colors, different bloom time will make for a very attractive garden. You can plant for pollinators, looking for things that will attract different bees and butterflies. You can plant for birds, things that may produce seed that birds like, or berries that they will be drawn to. You can basically design your plantings any way you would design any other kind of garden, as long as you pay attention to the soil moisture content and the requirements of each plant. And you may need to amend the soil as necessary, depending upon your soil type. You might want to add some sand, some topsoil, and some compost to make a mix that's appropriate for those plants. And this is a plant list. There are many plant lists out on the internet that are very helpful for choosing plants. This one in particular is for rain gardens and specifically, and it's available on the Ulster County, New York .gov website from the Onondaga Cooperative Extension. And I have provided a list of resources, which I'll show at the end, and it'll also be posted online. It will have all these websites available for your reference. So here you can choose plants based on when they bloom, what color they bloom, how big they are, what kind of soil requirements and moisture requirements they have. And you really can do almost anything with a rain garden, as long as you're planting the right plant in the right place in the rain garden itself. You should not have any problems. Another very useful tool is this plant finder created by the Native Plant Trust, which is located in Massachusetts. And they have, it's an interactive tool. You select certain criteria for the plants that you're looking for, color, whether it's a shrub or a tree or ground cover. And then you can select some other criteria. In particular, I'm highlighting that you want to select, for us here in Putnam County, Ecoregion 58. An ecoregion they classify the native plants based on the geographic area, which is an ecoregion in which they have similar geology, soil, and plant communities. So anybody in ecoregion 58, wherever they are, which might not be Putnam County, if you look back at this map, you'll see this whole area of green is ecoregion 58. goes all the way up to the into Canada. And so the plants that are suitable in one part of ecoregion 58 are most likely suitable in any part. And then specifically, you want to check rain garden plants here, and then it will give you a list of plants that you can use in different locations in your rain garden. Maintaining the rain garden, well, it's really not a high maintenance activity. Maybe for the first year or so, you want to be careful to monitor how it's performing. You want to observe it during a rainstorm and make sure that it's working as you planned it. You'll do some regular weeding as you would in any kind of garden. Yearly mulching, and that's really just for the first few years. I think eventually the plants will fill in and you will not be seeing bare soil. You won't need to mulch, but otherwise the mulch is going to keep the weeds down, hold soil in place, and keep the moisture in place so that the plants will survive during periods of drought. You want to make sure that the plants are getting adequate water, especially in the first year. You might want to use a rain gauge. They want to get at least an inch of water a week, and so you might need to do some supplemental watering. And we encourage people to leave the stems and leaves over the winter, leave the stems standing, allow the leaves to fall to the ground. They are providing excellent mulch, the best mulch you can give your rain garden plants, and they're keeping the soil warm over the winter. They're providing habitat for very important pollinators and other insects, and the insects that are helping to decompose and filter the water. So you want to leave those things standing. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to rain barrels. If for some reason you are unable to, you don't have a site for a rain garden, you can use rain barrels. They do contain some amount of water, although not as much as a rain garden would. They save water for later use. In other words, they're not just infiltrating into the soil, but you're harvesting the water, you're collecting it, and then you can use it for another purpose, for watering something or washing your car or your patio. They're inexpensive and they're easy to install. You can purchase them ready-made, or you can make one. These barrels, you can get these blue barrels or other colored barrels. You want to try to get food grade barrels so you're not introducing any kind of toxins into the environment. And there are kits available. They're very inexpensive that will sell you the spigots and the openings, and even include hole saws for drilling the holes in the barrels for making for putting in the spigot and the top. But keep in mind that a 1-inch storm falling on 1,000 square foot of impervious surface will generate a total of 623 gallons. And one of these barrels is typically about 50 or 60 gallons. So you may need more than one rain barrel. The things that all rain barrels, whether you buy them or make them, have in common is there'll be a rainwater inlet at the top, and this should be screened. Here's a picture of a purchase screen, but it doesn't need to be so fancy. You can just put some window screening around the top of the barrel and maybe fasten it with a bungee so that mosquitoes don't get in and animals don't get in. And it also keeps out debris. You want a spigot so you can get the water out so you can water your plants. And then you need an overflow because it may fill up, it may overflow, and you want that overflow water to be able to go someplace that you're controlling. And so a normal garden hose can be used for that. You want to direct it either to a lawn or a garden bed where it's not going to cause erosion. You can put a sprinkler, some sort of little sprinkler on the end of it so that the water coming out of that overflow hose is distributed and dispersed a little bit and not going to be a powerful force that would cause erosion. There are some optional things you could add to your rain barrels. One would be a first flush diverter. That's this picture over here. This part of the this tube that goes down below the intake is the diverter, where the first couple of cups of water that come down off the roof would go into this sort of like a holding tank and not into your rain barrel. And that's because this water, the first water coming off the roof, is going to be the most contaminated by chemicals or maybe droppings, animal droppings, or other things on your roof that you wouldn't necessarily want in your rain barrel. So that gets siphoned off into this diverter, and then once that fills up, the rest of the water then goes straight into the rain barrel. You might want to put a submersible pump into your rain barrel so that you can get the water further away and maybe a little bit more forcefully than the rain barrel could otherwise produce. If you want to hook it up to a sprinkler system, probably a drip irrigation system would work. I don't think anything, you definitely would need a pump for something more than just drip irrigation. You might also want to put a filter on your your intake that would go into the rain barrel to catch any debris, leaves, acorns, anything else that might wash into the downspout. Unless if you have guards on your gutters, then that might all be an adequate filter. Installing the rain barrel, you want to position it next to a downspout so you don't have to, so you can get the water conveniently from the downspout into the barrel. You can use a rain chain if you don't have a downspout that just comes down from the gutter. You want a solid base, a level base, because a filled rain barrel could be 400 or 500 pounds. You don't want it tipping over. If you elevate the rain barrel a little bit, a foot say, you'll get some additional pressure out of the barrel. So you'll get the water a little further and you might be able to use it a little bit further away. You want to make sure that the screen is secured at the top. That's very important. Now you might find that you need or want more than one rain barrel. Maybe you have several downspouts that are not near your rain garden, or you don't have a rain garden. So you might want to daisy chain the rain barrels, and you can do that in several ways. You can connect them with instead of having an overflow that just runs out on the ground, the overflow goes into another rain barrel. That's one way to do it. Or you could connect them at the bottom. When you connect them at the top, one will fill up and overflow into the other. When you connect them at the bottom, they will all fill at the same rate. And remember, the roof area times the number of inches of rain times 0.623 gallons equals the gallons of water that you will be collecting in your rain barrel. So that gives you an idea of how many rain barrels you might want to install. Rain barrel maintenance is pretty simple. There's not a whole lot to do, but you do want to make sure you empty your rain barrel regularly, certainly in between storms, because if it's full from one storm, then it won't be able to take on any more water at the next storm. You can use the water for just about anything, but not to water vegetables. That's because we don't know what's in that water if it's coming off your roof. So you want to use it for other things. You can water any other plants with it, just not edibles. You want to clean it yearly, keep the debris out, check for leaks, especially if it's outside during the winter. You want to make sure it doesn't crack in the winter. Check the screens to make sure they're tight and nothing can get in, and check that the overflow is not causing erosion. You can put, as I said, you can put a sprinkler at the end of the overflow, and that would distribute the water a little bit more evenly so it doesn't cause erosion. Now, a couple of other things we can do to minimize, stormwater runoff. And one of them is just to make sure we distribute the water. So instead of having a single downspout coming off your roof, if you could break it up into several different downspouts, that's less water in a given spot, and the ground might be better able to absorb and infiltrate what's coming off those downspouts. We can also use impervious or use porous, pervious pavers to reduce runoff and encourage infiltration. And we can see these things being used more often now. And it's a good idea if you're redoing a driveway or building a patio to consider using a permeable surface instead of a hard a hard impervious pavement. And finally, there's a role for municipalities, and we could take these drains here on the side of the road and convert it to a roadside rain garden that would catch the runoff. You can see in this picture, the runoff is coming from the roadway into this rain garden, and then it wouldn't be going into the drains and into the lake. And it would be nice to see some of our municipalities adopting an approach like this. In some places, stormwater is such a big issue that they are taxing residents for stormwater management. But on the other hand, if you implement a rain garden or rain barrels, you can get a tax credit based on the amount of square footage of impervious surface that you're mitigating. So this is a direction that it would be nice to see our towns and county moving in. It would certainly help with flooding and dealing with the runoff caused by our roads. And this is the resource list that I mentioned. It will be posted and available for you to print. Some very good, wonderful videos online that detail the construction of a rain garden and also rain barrels. And I encourage you to take a look at this. Okay.
Lynn, thank you very much for that excellent and informative presentation. I can't stress enough to people who are watching this how important it is for each of us to take personal responsibility for limiting runoff from our properties, whether or not we live directly on the lake. Anybody who lives in the watershed of the lake near which they live contributes to runoff to the lake. If you live across the street and water runs off your lake, it crosses the road and eventually ends up in the lake. If you live a few blocks from the lake, it runs down the roads into the stormwater drains and will eventually run in our lake. So anything we can each do is very important to the future health of our lakes. So please revisit this presentation, call the Cornell Cooperative Extension with questions, and let's all install rain gardens. Thank you and have a good evening.